Greetings, friends, and welcome to the Cowboy Up podcast, where the talk, conversation, storytelling is all about the West and helping you to experience your inner cowboy. Well, the cowboys, Russell and Alan, you know they like to talk about horses. Well, we're right back at it. Stories of horses. And today our guest is Chad Hanson. He's the author of In a Land of Awe. What a wonderful title. In a Land of Awe. Finding Reverence in the Search for Wild Horses. I can hardly wait. Sounds exciting. And so the program, it begins right now.
Alan, it seems like we haven't been doing this for a little while. I just got back from Montana, OTO Ranch, Montana's first dude ranch, talking with Montana State University and the Forest Service and meeting some great people and enjoying that truly historic spot outside Gardner, Montana.
Well, you're kind of expanding that holding up there, aren't you?
Well, we're not really. We're just trying to find a way to work with Montana State and the Forest Service. Of course, it's their ranch, so it's just a special spot, and we're trying to find ways to work together to make it available to people. So anyway, what have you been up to?
Well, I'm here in hot Tucson over the summer, and that pretty well describes a lot of life here. But anyway, I'm envious of you up in Montana.
Well, I'm back. So I'm enjoying Tucson. We had a microburst go through White Stallion right now, so if you hear some chainsaws in the background, they're trying to clean up the horrendous mess this storm hit us.
Really did some damage, huh?
Yeah, no kidding. But anyway, let's wild horses. You had 1,500 of them at Mustang Meadows, and pretty unique thing that you did at the time.
Well, I was fascinated with the wild horses and kind of drawn to the wild horses, but then I thought, well, if I'm going to be with the horses, I need to make friends with them. I don't need to chase them all over the West, but I need to have them think that they're home here and that I'm part of their life, and make friends with them. So that was an interesting piece of life to kind of make that come to fruition.
Well, and you're kind of breaking up, so if you can just kind of hang in one spot, but we're rarely apart. But today, Chad Hanson, author of In a Land of Awe, Finding Reverence in the Search for Wild Horses, is with us. He's a professor, writer, nature photographer. He and his wife, Lynn, founded the Wyoming Mustang Institute, which works to ensure healthy and stable wild horse populations on public lands. And that's, of course, a huge deal to you, Alan. And at Casper College, Chad teaches sociology and religion and has won numerous writing awards as well as creative writing fellowship from the Wyoming Arts Council. He's a graduate where I guess we're all alumni of the University of Arizona here in Tucson. And he and Lynn divide their time between Casper, Wyoming, and Red Feathers Lakes region of Colorado, and of course all our families from Casper, Wyoming. We're the outcasts down here in Arizona, so you probably run into some of our relatives up there. Casper's not that big. Chad, it's great to have you with us.
Great to be with you. Thanks.
How'd you get interested in the wild horses?
Well, it's funny. I'm actually from Minnesota originally, but my wife and I moved to Casper, Wyoming in 2001. And in part, it was because I'd gotten the job here at Casper College, but in part, it was because I was and still am, to some degree, a fly fisherman. My first couple of books had to do with fly fishing for trout. And Casper and Wyoming generally is just trout fishers' paradise. So that's what brought us here. And we lived in Wyoming for a decade before I even realized that we had wild horses. I thought wild horses were just something that school kids read about, or thought they were like unicorns or something, not even real or still with us. And then it was just a quirk on a trip to go fly fishing. We kept seeing horses on what I knew was public land. And so we Googled it a little bit, and we discovered that we were actually on a wild horse herd management area. And I've always been a photographer. So my first impulse was to grab my camera and walk out to try to make an image of these animals. And that's about all it took. One trip across the sagebrush to make a picture of these horses. And I don't fly fish that much anymore. I figured, what's the point? When you have animals like this in the kind of settings where they live, why would you want to do anything else?
How often do you get out with them? What's your schedule?
Well, in the summertime, it's quite a bit. We camp out on the prairies and in the mountains where they live, and we do that 2, 3, 4 days at a time. During the school year, it's more like weekends. So we get out nearly every weekend during the academic year. But in the summertime, it's more than that.
Well, when you watch them at work and play, what kind of scenes grab you and you know that you want to photograph and then go on from there? What would you like watching? I mean, what draws you to them?
Well, I'm a sociologist by training, and apart from just their obvious beauty, one of the things that appealed to me about horses in general, but wild horses in particular, is how social they are. Horses are just as social and community-oriented as people, maybe even more so. And one of the exciting things to me is that I think we're just kind of on the cusp of some new lines of research that are going to help us to show the nature of wild horse communities. They create societies out there on the prairie. For people who've spent a little time with wild horses, you guys probably know that the basic social unit for wild horses is the band. They live in family bands. And then historically, we've just made a distinction between their family band and the wider herd. But I think what we're starting to find is that it's more complicated than that. Horses live in family bands in the wild. They probably also have something more like an extended clan, maybe even a bigger bonded group, and then subpopulations within the wider herd. And it's fascinating. So part of the appeal for me is to try to unlock some of the questions about the sort of societies that these animals create out there in the wild.
Do they kind of revolve around a group leader, usually a stallion, and then his band, or is it a different dynamic?
Well, that's a great question, and I don't have a single easy way to answer that. I got to get at least 2 parts to the answer. For every family band, there's nearly always one dominant male. They call it the band stallion. And he wins his position by being strong and aggressive and fighting off challengers. There are always bachelor stallions that are interested in stealing mares from a band stallion. So band stallions have their hands full keeping their harem or their family group together. But each band also has a lead mare. A mare that actually makes most of the decisions about where the group travels, when they seek water, and how and under what circumstances. And lead mares are elected. They have to win the trust. of the other mares in the family. They have to show the others in the group that they're the ones to turn to in times of need and for wisdom and for information about the landscape. So stallions get a lot of the attention. Every band has a band stallion, but actually it's the lead mares that have a really important role in a wild horse family.
It's probably like human life.
The stallion is kind of the drill sergeant, but the mares would be the colonel.
Yeah, and the brains of the outfit. That's right.
might be the opposite. Hey, I got to tell you a quick story. I'm in the dude ranch business, and of course we have one of the typical aspects of a dude ranch, maybe not uniformly, but almost always. We run our horses in herds, and because you want the herds to handle their social dynamics on their off time and come to work ready to work. And so we've got so it's not wild horses, no stallions, but it's still, there's a whole social structure. And so we're talking to a reality show producer that's going to do a show at Circle Bar in Montana. And we're just telling her some logistical issues. And by the time we were done, because she's very sharp and always looking for interesting aspects, she goes, wow, we got to focus on the horses too. They're like the people. They've got their social dynamics. And I said, you're absolutely right. And that's at a dude ranch.
They have a whole social structure.
Absolutely.
You bet.
So, why do horses, in your mind, because you talk about it in the book, and why do they inspire the reverence?
Well, I think on some level it's real simple. Horses are bigger than we are. And, I mean that physically, of course, but I mean it metaphorically. Horses just loom really large in human culture and history. And the sight of a band of wild horses running across a rugged landscape in the West, it just arrests people's attention. You can't take your eyes away from a setting like that or a scene like that. And I think for most people, it almost stops time. It's like a moment outside of time when you're just caught in the grip of what's in front of you. So I think for a lot of people, you've probably heard that phrase, charismatic megafauna. You talk about big, exciting animals that way. I think horses put the charisma in the phrase charismatic megafauna. I think more so than just about any other animal that you might spend time with. Human beings have a fascination for these creatures. Part of it's their size, part of it's just their obvious beauty. And I think in the case of wild horses, it's the landscape too. Wild horses live in big open spaces, and a lot of the new research on topics like reverence and awe, a lot of our best new research says that feeling something vast nearly always produces those sorts of feelings. A sense of vastness is a really good way to put yourself in the frame of mind where you're feeling things like reverence and awe. So horses in general, but wild horses in particular, have this combination of their size, beauty, and the setting. It's kind of a perfect storm.
Well, do you think that we should go forward as a nation and set aside areas specifically for horses, or are they okay with multiple use? Are you okay with that, or what are your feelings on that?
Oh, I'm all of the above on that. I think when we manage wild horse, the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, they oversee most of our wild horse herd areas, and they have a mandate for multiple use, and I don't see anything wrong with that. I think there's plenty of room for agribusiness, wildlife, mustangs. It's a big country, and I think we can serve a lot of interests on public land. We already have a handful of what we call wild horse ranges. One of them is in Montana. It's the Pryor Mountain herd. And that herd is managed, and I'll use the legal language, managed principally for wild horses. It is still multiple use, but wild horse management has a priority in that range. There's another one in Nevada and a third in Colorado called the Little Book Cliffs. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that either, where there is a demand and the horses are beloved and it's part of the tourist economy. I think that makes sense too.
And of course you said,
well, where do they stop being wild horses and move into the managed horse arena? I mean, there's some overlap there, but when do they stop being called wild horses and really become just a managed herd of horses?
Well, I would say that
kind of a tough question.
It is, but it's also a good question, and I want to give you my best answer. I'm going to put it like this. We live in, I'm sure you've heard this term before, we live in an age that a lot of scientists are calling the Anthropocene. And that means on this planet, we live in the age where human life probably touches every aspect of life here on Earth. So in Wyoming and most other Western states, of course, we consider elk and antelope and deer wild, but their populations are managed. We have hunting seasons, and we pay special attention to how many licenses we can sell every year. We manage those populations very carefully. And we do the same with wild horses. They are managed just like any other species. That doesn't make them less wild in my mind. It just means we live in a world where we have to make good decisions about our ecology and how many animals are too many, how many are not enough. These are choices that we have to make as a society and as a culture. And we do it with everything. Do it with every type of wildlife.
Chad, I guess when you say that and you use the word Anthropocene,
yeah,
and didn't know it. And I think it's so clearly true in one of those realities that's around us, but we don't necessarily check into. So I think that's a great way to end and take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Hey there, this is producer Lynn Wheezy Sneed. After 3 seasons of being hands-on with this podcast, I got to be a guest at a dude ranch. Along with my husband, we were celebrating our anniversary. How was it, you ask? Well, it was fantastic. We had so many activities to choose from. Horseback riding, of course, but also archery, which I loved, shooting, e-biking, a Jeep tour, arts and crafts, swimming. And then there were the delicious meals, can you say fall off the bone ribs, and happy hours and meeting people from across the U.S. and Europe. I have to say, dude ranch vacations are now a mainstay on our bucket list, and our resource for deciding where to go is the Dude Ranchers Association. They have the intel on 92 ranches around the West and are so helpful matching our needs and wishes to the right ranch. I encourage you to check out what Dude Ranches have to offer, whether for your family or a weekend getaway with that special someone, or even a solo retreat. You can reach out to the Dude Ranchers Association at duderanch.org or call 307-587-2339. Hey, I hope to see you on the trail.
So, Chad, I'm going to circle back, I think, a little bit. And you're teaching at Casper College, sociology and religion, and that must almost certainly impact your thinking and your writing about the horses.
Yeah, it does. And one of the things that I often connect between the work I do out on the field, making images of horses, the work I do in the classroom, teaching in sociology and religion, I often talk about the role that horses have played in a lot of the world's major wisdom traditions. Horses have a really prominent role in spirituality and religion. Maybe most obvious in Native American spirituality, of course. Horses were spiritual partners to Native people, but worldwide, horses figure really prominently in religion. The Hindus have a horse god called Hayagriva. It's the god of knowledge, wisdom. In ancient Chinese folklore, there's a horse called Kolima. They call him the 1,000-mile horse, could run 1,000 miles a day, as the legends have it. In Norse mythology, there's an 8-legged horse called Sleipnir. He was the horse of the god Odin, and Odin rode this horse back and forth between our world and Asgard, the world of the gods. In Islam, for Muslims, in some of the Islamic literature, one of my favorite passages has to do with the creation of the horse. And the story has it that when horses were first created, the Allah, the god of Muslims, gave a command to the south wind, and he told the south wind, "Condense thyself." And the south wind turned itself into a living creature, and it happened to be a horse. So all throughout our wisdom traditions, we have these beautiful stories and legends about horses. And I actually take my religion class out on the prairie to look at horses. We talk about feelings like reverence and awe and how they're integral to spiritual practices, how nature often inspires those very same things. I imagine you see a fair amount of that on the Dude Ranch when people get to spend time with horses. They just kind of melt into the experience. It's incredible.
Oh, we do. And, we talk about it. This is Dude Ranch minutia for a second, but we talk about that we've got a lot of things that we do or offer that bring people. They're the boxes that they think need to be checked to make them choose us, but it's the horses and the people that bring them back.
Yeah.
Didn't you tell me that most of your guests select one horse, and then when they come back, they want that horse, and they have an individual relationship with the one horse?
Absolutely. I mean, some people are really that way, and others they like the opportunity to try different horses, which they wouldn't necessarily if they had their own. My wife was just telling me this morning she just received an email from a guest, and he's pretty anxious to buy one of our horses because his daughter's horse had died, and she had they tried to replace that horse unsuccessfully, but this horse here just really was the connection for her. And so when we hear that story, it makes us listen where we wouldn't ordinarily sell a horse. But yes, that's exactly right. And I got you're talking about Chad, about the bands and seeing the horses moving, and you want to talk about the thing that turns guests on is watching horses run in the morning. Especially if it's a jingle out of pastures up in the mountains. People love to see groups of horses moving, and which kind of circles back to awe and reverence. And I believe there's research on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Topics like that were left alone for a while. People assumed that those were tied to religion, and a lot of scientists thought, well, we'll just leave that to people who study religion. But lately, psychologists and psychiatrists and other people have been studying feelings like awe and reverence, and it turns out there's a physiological or a chemical component to it. One of the main things that happen when people feel this way is the brain releases a chemical called oxytocin. And in the past, we used to call that the love hormone. Oxytocin is released when you get a hug from somebody you care about. It's released when a mother sees her child for the first time. It's a chemical in our brains that actually has a social function. So when we see something that moves us, whether it's a foal on the prairie or a band of horses running, oxytocin is released in our brains. And it comes with a whole set of what we call pro-social characteristics. When people feel this way, when people feel reverence and awe, they also become kinder and more cooperative and more generous with each other.
Is that a chemical reaction or what?
It is. It's a biochemical reaction. We have the research today that shows that when oxytocin is released, when people feel awe and they get a dose of oxytocin, they become all of those things: kinder, more cooperative. And hey, let's face it, we live in a time when our communities could all use a lot more of that stuff. So
you think we ought to make pills of it, huh, where we can take it?
Hey, I always thought if somebody could bottle this and put it in a pill form, they'd be the next billionaire pharmaceutical executive, I swear.
So in the meantime, the doctor just needs to prescribe a Dude Ranch vacation around.
Absolutely. That's right.
So circling back another direction, you do the wild horse experience as a class. And you had your religion class out on the prairie. What is the wild horse experience class?
The wild horse experience is a 3-day course where we have 2 days on campus, on the Casper College campus. The first 2 days involve slideshows, discussions, reading. We talk about horse history, natural and cultural history. We have a unit on wild horse etiquette, or what it takes to get close enough to a band of horses to make a good photograph. And then the course concludes with a day in the field where we go out and look for wild horses. And it's been remarkable. I'm always amazed. I live right in the center of Wyoming. I'm always amazed, first of all, how many people are unaware that we even have wild horses. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised. I lived here for a long time before I figured it out myself. But when people find out that there's wild horses among us and we get out in the field to try to find them, what I've seen is incredible. I've seen people drop to their knees and raise their arms and squint their eyes to try to stop the tears. I've seen people move to prayer when they see wild horses for the first time. I've seen people break into song. I'm not even making this up. I think it was about 2 years ago. We were on the prairie in a van. We came across our first band of wild horses. We saw a group about 100 yards from the van off to the left, and a woman in about the second row of the van just started singing. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. And
so
we're in a
is that
van.
a chemical reaction or an emotional reaction, or how do you categorize that?
I think it's all of that. I think it's an emotional reaction. I think there's a biochemical component. There's a social component. One woman started singing, and the next thing you know, we have a chorus of 10 people in this van. And that's a catchy tune. So I won't sing any more of it because I know what my voice sounds like. But you get the picture. It's a chorus out there on the prairie. And I think it's one of the best things we can do for ourselves, to put ourselves in these situations where we feel this way. It's medicine. That's the best way I can put it.
So how do you box that and sell it?
Well, yeah, if only I could put that in a bottle and stick it on a shelf. But hey, I think what you do at a dude ranch is a perfect example of how this works. I think we've got public lands where this can happen. And the trick is, when people have these big awe-inspiring experiences. You know, when they spend a week at a ranch or take a weekend to go find wild horses, what happens is those big moments create experiences like reverence and awe. And then what happens is we start to get better. It's like any skill. It has to be practiced. Sometimes it takes a big wow to get you geared toward feeling this way. And then once you start to get practiced, you can see it every day. You can see it with the wind blowing through the trees. You can see it just by looking up at the stars at night. But I think sometimes it takes a big moment to get the ball rolling. But ideally, you know, this is something people can turn to every day and almost all the time.
You know, I got to tell you.
How do you sell that? How do you package that to sell it? Because you're talking about a real thing, but it's how do you get your hand in that bottle?
Well, I think he's answered it, Alan. I mean, I just wanted to say that I'm going to interrupt just because I think we talked to a lot of people, and that was a really, I don't use this word very often, it's overused today, profound statement. And that's why you can't bottle it. You got to go see it, experience it, get the chemical reaction, get the emotional, and then get the ball rolling, I think.
Is it a chemical reaction, an emotional reaction? What words do you use to describe it?
Well, you know, for my part, there's only so many things I know how to do, but I know how to write books. So, and I know how to teach classes. So when I started thinking about, hey, what can I do to let people know that this is important and it's helpful, I tried to spread the word. And I do it through writing, through teaching. And you guys do it week in and week out, I'm sure, on the ranch. And there's all kinds of ways that we can teach each other some of these secrets. They're not even so secret. Google search on the internet these days will turn up all kinds of information. Like I said, the research is really starting to blossom right now. And that's a good thing. I think the timing is perfect. This is just what the world, I think it's one of those situations where the world needs this, and here we have it.
Well, you're preaching to the choir with us. We also want to ask about your nonprofit organization called the Wyoming Mustang Institute. You and your wife Lynn put that together. What's the focus there?
Well, yeah, we did create a nonprofit, and we use the organization to advocate for wild horses. A couple of our initiatives that we're working on right now, one of them has to do with the creation of a map. The Bureau of Land Management has a map that outlines the wild horse herd areas in our home state, but it's not detailed enough to be very user-friendly. So we're hoping to build a map to make it easier for people to go out and take a look at wild horses. I give a lot of talks on the subject, and just like the conversation we're having today, this is one of my favorite things to discuss. So I'm always happy to talk about some of the new research on time spent in nature and how good it is for mental health and physical health. There's some new research on the history of wild horses in North America, and a lot of my talks for the Institute have been focused on that lately. Wild horses evolved in North America. The oldest horse fossils on Earth were found here in Wyoming, over in the western part of the state, about 55 million years old. Horses were different back then. They were about the size of a dog, and they had 3 toes. But over the course of evolution, they grew into the modern animal we know today, equus, the modern horse. We thought for a long time that horses went extinct on this continent maybe 10 or 12,000 years ago, but there's some new research that says they lived all the way through the last ice age up until about 5,000 years ago. And to me, that's exciting. And there's also some new research on just how soon it was that Native American groups, how soon they got access to the Spanish horses that were brought over by explorers. So that history is always changing. And so we use the Institute to educate people about some of that history, natural and cultural. It's a fun part of what we do.
That's always been an interesting subject to me, is how the native people took to the horses, and all of a sudden it was like we all view that the horses were always there and the native people always had them, and that isn't the way it really worked.
There are groups that have oral histories that suggest they always had horses. The archaeological record goes cold. We have fossils all the way through about 7,500 years ago. We've got this new DNA evidence that says horses were here about 5,000 years ago. And then there's a gap. And we know that, of course, the Spanish and the Europeans brought horses with them during colonization, settlement, exploration. But you're right. Those horses, some of them made their way into the hands of native people, and it transformed their cultures. And in a time frame that's kind of mind-boggling, they went from using dogs to haul their dwellings and their supplies to they became societies centered around the horse.
Yeah. That was a short period of time.
Yeah, in just a few generations. Pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
So, kind of a different topic, but the horses, and I've scanned your book, and we'll finish up talking about that. And unfortunately, I didn't get it soon enough to read it. But the BLM takes some criticism, and like anything, probably partly deserved and partly not. If you could change one thing in the management, because we learned today what we should have known. All animals of significance today are managed. What would you see that the BLM or just our infrastructure could do differently to help the horses?
Well, I'm glad you asked, and this is one of the other pieces of the work we do through the Wyoming Mustang Institute. We advocate for the use of anti-fertility serum called PZP.
I was just going to bring that up. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, some of your listeners may be familiar. If not, it's just a thumbnail sketch. PZP is a serum that can be administered with a dart. And the technology is such right now that when you dart a mare with PZP, it prevents the birth of foals for 2 years. So it takes some work on the part of the BLM. They have to keep track, and they have to build a database to see which mares have been darted and when, and there has to be follow-up. But our view is that preventing births on the range in the long run is a lot more affordable and a lot more humane way to manage these herds than to just sit back, wait for the numbers to grow, and then round them up with helicopters, and in some cases store them for the rest of their lives.
I'm in agreement with all you're saying. I for where I come from, for whatever reason, I have always had an affinity to grass. The country is covered with grass, and grass holds the soil together, but all kinds of things. And I always think, well, if we're going forward and in a good fashion, we'll have a healthy grass. That if the grass is healthy, then other things follow. And life gets better. And so I kind of come down in my thinking as, well, what can we do to make grass better, healthier, more of it, and everything flows from that.
And
I tend to agree.
And Alan, you're of course a longtime supporter in a significant way of the fertility or the anti-fertility drugs.
Yeah, the PZP. Yeah, well, you graze off too much grass and it gets unhealthy, and then all kinds of bad stuff happens. So, yeah, you need a way to tie it together in a logical fashion.
Well, let me ask you, Chad, as we're winding up. You also do a lot of photography, and is that something people can find and have access to?
Yeah, it sure is. We have a couple of social media accounts. Our main webpage is Wyo Mustangs, wyomustangs.org. And on that page, you can find out about the work of our institute. We also have links, icons and links to Instagram, and I use a platform called Flickr to showcase some of my photography. But yeah, you can find all that right through our website.
And could you say, I'm sorry because I don't have it here, could you give your website again?
Yeah, it's wyomustangs.org. That's wyomustangs.org.
Right, and I always remind people, remember it's ORG, ORG. You know, the book, I scanned it. You know, Alan and I talked to a lot of folks that are interested in horses or Mustangs in specific, and your book really takes a different view, and we've talked a lot about reverence and awe, but it really has a perspective that anybody, whether they're interested in the horses currently or not, they really should get your book. And I assume it's anywhere available.
Absolutely.
In all the places.
Yep. Your local bookstore or all online retailers. It's widely available.
Chad, it's been really good to talk to you today. I've really enjoyed.
Yeah, thanks. It was great to be with you guys.
Right. I parrot that for sure. It's been really a good conversation. I just want to finish with In a Land of Awe, Finding Reverence in the Search for Wild Horses, Chad Hanson. And, you know, what I was able to squeeze in once I got it yesterday, it just says this is a book that should be read. So thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you.
Thanks, Chad.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
And we'll sign out. You know, Alan and I always want to thank Fred and everybody at Golden Wings Horseshoes for sponsoring our Cowboy Up podcast. You know, these revolutionary horseshoes are like no other. And as they like to say, and I know, horses love them. They're made from a special non-metal compound. It took Fred 10 years to come up with it. I always ask him, what is it made of? Oh, I don't know. Well, okay, that's a kind way of, it's proprietary, and it should be. Took 10 years to get there. They're comfortable for horses because they absorb concussion and they are flexible. And, you know, the big negative to putting metal horseshoes on horses, and you got to do it, despite what some people believe, some territory needs shoes. And, of course, metal doesn't flex. These do. They flex up and down and in and out. And when a horse's foot hits the ground, the ability to expand out is really healthy for the inner structures of the horse's hoof. I can absolutely, without hesitation, testify that these horseshoes, Golden Wings horseshoes, have helped a lot of our horses. Some are only on the trail because of them. And, of course, I told the story, I think, a month ago that Barb is winning buckles on her mounted shooting horse that had been retired until Golden Wings came along and put him back into competition. We have horses that were out of commission, and they're back on the all-day 18, 20-mile rides. So go to Golden Wings, plural, goldenwingshorseshoes.com, goldenwingshorseshoes.com, and they'll get the, and Fred, man, they're fast. They'll get the shoes right to you, and your horseshoer is going to be your new biggest fan because they're so easy to put on.
Indeed, we're signing off. Hey, once again, I oftentimes like to say, you know what, you'll learn more here, good things, here by accident than most places by design. And so hopefully we can put together a program that makes you smile, perhaps gives you a measure of entertainment, but at the same time, we learn about our world and about perhaps how we can live more rightly and correctly in conjunction with one another and within the wonderful animals that nature has put before us. That's right. Learning how to live and learning how to live the right way. That's what the Cowboy Up podcast is all about, and we're so glad that you can be a part of it. Reach out to us at thecowboyuppodcast@gmail.com, thecowboyuppodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Comments, questions, perhaps a little critical suggestion from time to time, or perhaps you have somebody who you would like to nominate to be a guest on the program. Maybe you'd like to even raise your hand and volunteer yourself. We'd love to hear from you. Once again, the Cowboy Up Podcast @gmail.com. I'm Stan Houston, standing in for Lynn Wheezy Sneed. She'll be back next week, and we thank you for your time. All the best and blessings, and ride tall, ride safe, and do good. Do good work. Bye for now.
My